No trend lasts forever in the video game industry. Technology is always improving. New ideas are taking over. Today's trends might be tomorrow's old news. And certain really big video game trends from the past suddenly disappeared without a trace. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 video game trends that suddenly disappeared. Starting off at number 10, realistic graphics. 20 years ago, video games had a graphics problem. Muddy yellow filters and brown textures were all the rage. Video games were smudged with Vaseline in the form of bloom lighting, a type of a lighting technique that was both too bright and too dark at the same time somehow. The trend really started on the 3D machines like the PS2 and original Xbox. Processing power wasn't unlimited, and the ugly bloom lighting was the easiest way to look acceptable enough on an old standard definition television, and actually did kind of improve what stuff looked like in 640 by 480 or whatever. It wasn't really just technology to blame, though. The mid-2000s and 2010s were the height of the military shooter era, for pretty obvious reasons. If you know anything about history, there were military shooters left and right, and even games that weren't military shooters were definitely influenced by them. Call of Duty was entering the modern warfare phase in 2007, and every other company wanted to be just like that. Even massive games like Gears of War on 360 cranked down the saturation to a minimum, threw in a lot of brown, called it a day. There were so many of these games. We got a parody in the form of Spec Ops: The Line, a game that's got more yellow filters, more muddy textures, and more war crimes than any of the other games it's clowning on. I mean, granted, it's very grim satire, but it's satire. And with the progression of texture resolution and bloom lighting eventually becoming HDR, graphics became a lot clearer, and developers started seeing colors again. Like, look at the difference between Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age Veilguard. Whatever you think of Veilguard, you can't deny it's got pretty colors. I'm happy to have escaped the drab gray warehouses and entered the cotton candy era of video games, although I do have hesitation about how far the pendulum is going to swing and then how far it's going to swing back.
You know this is a trap.
Absolutely. The whole city's gone crazy. Daniels might be our only hope of sorting this mess out.
First, tell me why you made.
At number 9 is movie tie-in games. With big publishing companies on the old 8-bit NES, realized you could pump out low-quality, cheap games and make a bunch of money for cross-promotional marketing's sake. You not only got money from the games selling themselves, but you got money from the companies who perhaps saw this as an opportunity to market their movie. Everybody won, right? Except maybe the gamers, because a lot of the games really sucked. These games were synonymous with trash for kids growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. Why else would games like Catwoman come out in 2004? Like, was anybody excited for a game based on the forgotten Halle Berry movie? Absolutely not. We also got games for Transformers, Batman Begins. I forgot about the Batman Begins one entirely until we thought, oh, what are some examples for this? There was some from the MCU movies. Iron Man 2 is an infamously bad waste of time video game. There's even a Thor video game, but I don't even remember what it looks like right now. Movie tie-in games used to be big business too. Now they barely exist. We were shocked when the Tom Cruise Mummy movie got a side-scrolling Metroidvania in 2017. I don't know what caused that, but the exception proves the rule. The games are dead now. The best you'll see is the occasional app on the Apple Store that disappears and is completely forgotten by the cultural zeitgeist in like 8 to 12 months. And that's if it's barely noticed at all. These games used to be cheapo childhood friends, bad games you'd rent when Blockbuster was out of everything else. And there's a good reason they stopped existing. As tech improved and expectations became higher, video games started taking years to make, and the dullest tie-in games were, not worth the effort. Like, these games would end up coming out years too late when they made one for a movie. And they were so rarely good. When we get a game like The Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay, it felt like a friggin' miracle. Games were exponentially more difficult to make now than the 8-bit era. They're very expensive. expensive, the profit margin can be very slim, even for mid-budget games. It kind of only makes sense that movie tie-ins died out. Well, big movie studios fear the death of theater chains, not understanding that the solution is right under their fricking noses. Stop making movies that cost $300 million. If every movie costs $300 million to make, you're not going to make any money, because a lot of movies fail. That's worth saving, though. It would be nice to have good movies again. I don't trust the gaming industry to do good movie tie-ins. Maybe at some point it'll be worth reviving it, but that point is not now. At number 8 is paid online passes. For a brief time, multiplayer passes were everywhere. Big games like Battlefield 3 or mid-tier games like Warhammer 40k Space Marine were packed with online passes. Gamers that aren't rapidly aging into obscurity might not remember this weird trend. Basically, you get an online pass with physical copies of the game. You buy the box, you'll get a sleeve of paper that has an online pass code. It's a one-time use code. It existed to combat a specific threat in the video game market, which is resellers. Video game publishers once feared that selling your game or sharing it was an existential threat to the industry, so online passes were invented. So this way, if you sold your game off GameStop in the future, theoretically another player would have to pay the $10 online pass to play multiplayer. You'd be able to play the single-player content, but online was off limits. That's the kind of scheme that completely dried up in the modern age for a lot of reasons. The lack of physical media in general is one of those reasons. Then there's the online-only requirements and optional cosmetics through battle passes completely taking over. There's no reason to sell online passes when games are earning so much more money selling skins. Earlier Call of Duty games post Call of Duty 4 would sell map packs. No reason to do that anymore. Battle Pass is everything now. And that's one trend that will definitely last longer than online passes. It works, and even though it's annoying, it's a lot less annoying. I don't like it, but it doesn't make me mad in the way a lot of these other practices did. At number 7, and this is actually one I quite mourn, fixed camera horror games. And if I'm completely honest, not just horror games, but I think horror is probably the best example of this type of thing. Like, you could argue that like Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, and 10 are good examples of fixed camera games, but let's keep it horror because, again, it was basically the only way the genre was done up until a certain era. And horror games are very big business again. Resident Evil is better than ever before. Silent Hill 2 Remake shows there's still a taste for traditional survival horror. Hell, Alan Wake 2 basically went full on into that, and it did it really well. You got limited items, large areas to explore, puzzles to solve, and scary enemies to fight. That's everything you need for a traditional survival horror game, right? Well, not exactly. All these new games did erase one certain trend that it basically was survival horror games. And, you know, I mean fixed camera, but what exactly I mean? I mentioned the pre-totally 3D Final Fantasy games, but let's be serious. Resident Evil is the original fixed camera game. Silent Hill also, although it wasn't a pre-rendered fixed camera game. Basically, either you had pre-rendered backgrounds or, like I said with Silent Hill, you had 3D environments, but the camera would view you from a specific angle, not third person necessarily, and you switched angles when you reached the camera's extent. It's kind of like moving around watching security cameras. It's an interesting aesthetic that indie gamers are still kind of capturing for nostalgia reasons, but I don't think it's going to be used in a big budget commercial game ever again. And just to be clear, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. I would love to see a AAA game utilize the Silent Hill camera format. Like, Until Dawn almost does that, not quite, but the original Resident Evil hit, tons of crappy ripoffs of the same style happened, and really it was something that allowed for pretty nice looking graphics with pretty minimal technology. And number 6 is motion controls. The Wii is certainly a console unto itself. Nintendo fully embraced the promise of motion controls on the Wii console, and everybody else tried to follow suit. The only problem was that they weren't that fun. Motion controls were great for games like Wii Sports, a game that the entire family could easily play together, but when you try to stick motion controls into an FPS, that does not work. anyone who has played a Wii knows that most games require motion controls really don't require that much motion. Instead of copying specific motions from games like No More Heroes 2, you're really just waving a stick around wildly. Doesn't matter what direction you go. And a lot of games follow this trend. Nintendo were the only ones trying to make games like Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, where you actually use your controller to swing like a sword in specific directions. But even that game required a peripheral add-on to make your controller actually, work. And the Wii was the best case scenario for motion controls. The disastrous Kinect by Microsoft for the Xbox 360 was so hated, so derided, it almost completely sank the Xbox One announcement. Actually, you know what? No, it was the second worst aspect of that announcement, but still, holy hell. It's not just about games. In fact, it's barely about games. That really was a disaster, wasn't it? Kinect was a large aspect of the disaster, though. It had no buttons. So the fun part about the Kinect is that it did not work at all. It had no buttons. You used your body to control stuff. And again, it didn't work. It did the opposite of work. It made the game that you were playing so much worse. Like, it was the nail in the coffin for future motion controllers. The Nintendo Switch has some cursory motion controls that aren't really required by any means, and virtual reality machines all have motion controls, but not only is that necessary, but it's not using your body to control the game. The VR controllers all have buttons on them. And number 5 is full motion video. The 90s were a dark time for video games. As many good games as there were made, they were plagued by one of the worst genres imaginable, the full motion video game. There were shooting games, adventure games, and just weird cinematic things that I think they were basically movies, but were a lot worse than movies. Not just because they forced some kind of stupid control method onto it, but because under no circumstance were they up to the quality of acting and production value that any movie that anyone remembers from the 90s, including bad ones, was. So videos in games had to be small, grainy, and short, which made them good for, cutscenes in video games like Final Fantasy VII. FMVs were in classic games like Myst, and the technology was impressive enough that publishers thought, well, why don't we just do that for the whole game? That'll be good. A whole game made out of weird and ugly cutscenes that are heavily compressed and acted badly. Ugh. Games like Dark Seed 2, Night Trap, and Fox Hunt were kind of like interactive movies. They digitized real actors, and they'd move around in 3D environments in Dark Seed 2, where you'd swap between scenes in Night Trap, just watch actors filmed in something like in Fox Hunt. I guess these are genres.
I'm hungry! I'm hungry!
But FMV, it was bad. You could say that they were ruined by FMV, but they were mostly occupied by FMV, so I don't know. The point is, not one of these FMV scenes were shot well. Instead, they were shot badly. And on top of that, as if the actors felt like they needed to top the cinematographers, the acting is so bad. They were just annoying to play for a litany of reasons. Hard to think of a single good game from the genre/era. Like, there are great games with FMV cutscenes that they don't detract from the game at all. But basically no incredible FMV games that we still talk about today. We do talk about them, but not because they're good. And number 4, multiplayer in every game. For a long time, every game had a whole bunch of weird multiplayer modes, whether we wanted them or not. Arkham Origins, one of the Batman Arkham Asylum games, had multiplayer modes. Dead Space 2 had a multiplayer mode nobody can play anymore. Even games like Spec Ops The Line had multiplayer. BioShock 2 had a multiplayer mode. They're all dead and also completely unique. Because all these games didn't really need multiplayer modes, developers really had to get creative. They couldn't copy Call of Duty or Fortnite because, Fortnite didn't exist. So modes were just weird. They were all games with budgets and professional development teams that knew what they were doing. But the multiplayer modes were not masterpieces, still, they were often very memorable. In all seriousness, I kind of mourn the loss of this trend. It's rare to see a game that has single player and multiplayer modes. Usually games will pick a lane unless they're famous dinosaur franchises like Call of Duty that keep the old ways alive forever, partly because it's important for them to do for their profits. But I think part of this might even be the death of mid-budget games. I will say we're starting to see a small resurgence of games with weird multiplayer modes in indie area, or from Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. Maybe multiplayer in every game will make a comeback, but it's probably going to not for a while at least. And number 3 is the RTS game. One of the biggest genres in video game history is the real-time strategy game, and it has shrunk from the center stage of games to become a niche. Games like StarCraft and Warcraft, they were the biggest games in the video game industry, with massive professional video game leagues, until battle arena games like League of Legends took over completely. Well, real-time strategy isn't a dead genre by any means. It's one of the most completely gone games. It's just reduced itself to such an extent. Blizzard would prefer to pump out yet another expansion pack of World of Warcraft, the MMO, than release a competent remaster of Warcraft 1 or 2.
Our forces are under attack. To arms!
Is there danger?
It's less about technology and more about taste. RTS games are slow-paced and PC-focused, so consoles are always going to trail behind because they don't have mouse controls. Although I feel like there's not really any good reason to not have a good keyboard trackpad controller that you could buy for a game, other than the fact that the genre is nearly non-existent anymore. But I guess part of the reason why the genre might not necessarily be that huge anymore is because honestly, the best ones are from even the earliest of the early. The Command & Conquer games, as far as I'm concerned, cannot be beaten. It's not like RTS is gone. It's still kind of limping along. Total War is fantastic. It's still actually kind of going strong unto itself, although it's sort of a genre unto itself. The remasters of Command & Conquer and Red Alert 1 are absolutely fantastic and make me so happy. But I don't see any new announcements happening in those franchises. The RTS genre is semi-dormant for now, disappearing down the memory hole until publishers can figure out a way to monetize it, which I just have to add is the worst reason for them not to be making them. And number 2 is the cover button. Gears of War was partially inspired by Resident Evil 4, but the Juggernaut shooter franchise spawned its own subgenre of third-person action games. Games with a dedicated cover button. You press a button, your character glues their back to a waist-high wall. In all seriousness, they weren't the first to have some kind of cover function. The original Metal Gear Solid has a fantastic one that functionally is very similar, but I mean, it serves a completely different purpose in Gears. Also, Gears is a lot faster than a stealth game, obviously. But you only need to go back a console generation to find a ton of cover shooters. The entire Uncharted series is probably the apex of what these games could do cinematically.
Ah, hell. Sorry, boys. Just needed to punch your tickets.
Then you get the games that gave the genre a bad name, like Eat Lead, The Return of Matt Hazard, which is boring as hell. Games like Inversion tried to spice things up with weird gravity hijinks, but didn't quite hit. Ubisoft tried to expand the cover shooter genre into the open world with the, okay, but not great Division games. Even the best developers got dragged down by the allure of cover shooters. Insomniac Games, the creators of the colorful and fun Spider-Man games on PS4 and 5, made Fuse in 2012. Nobody remembers it. It takes me a minute to remember what Fuse even is when it's brought up. It was not a big hit, and thankfully they bounced back in a big way. Cover shooters, they haven't exactly become mainstream again. There's a lot of them, but the cover button's kind of gone away. Like a lot of the recent ones, like Star Wars Outlaws, they just make the character take cover automatically when ducking and aiming. I think that's kind of a Uncharted thing. I think it works. A lot of other stuff in that game doesn't quite hit the mark, but yeah.
Sheriff! More coming from the water station!
Hear that, Kay?
Get to the water station.
And at number 1, instrument controllers. There was a time when rhythm games were the kings of every get-together. Whenever friends met in the same place, someone would pop out that big piece of plastic shaped like a guitar and rock a song in Guitar Hero. One of the most fun trends in recent memory, actually. Big publishers made crazy money selling giant hunks of plastic to consumers, and we ate it up. These big dusty monstrosities were the only way to play Guitar Hero and Rock Band. Huge games about listening to music and strumming along with the songs. The weird controllers were part of the fun. It really made you feel like you were doing something unique instead of pressing boring buttons on a controller. The instruments were the reason these games were big, and we can't even imagine another third-party peripheral taking space away from our Elite controllers or DualShock Edge controllers. Rhythm games are gone, but not entirely forgotten. We still have pretty fond memories of hitting the notes of Frankenstein by Edgar Winters without screwing up once. Maybe we'll dust off the full Rock Band collection, complete with the fake piano and drum set, for one more rhythm session one day. These things are undeniably incredibly fun, so I don't really understand why we've not seen a revival of one of this biggest trends. Maybe we got sick of our older brothers playing the same classic rock songs over and over again. But I'm gonna say this. I think part of it is the attempts to resurrect it were really ham-fisted and didn't really understand what was fun about the original Guitar Hero in the first place. They tried to do a bunch of weird things with it that I don't think anybody liked. That goes for both Rock Band and Guitar Hero, but Guitar Hero 5 in particular. They tried to make it more serious, and they tried to make the controller more quote-unquote realistic, which you can't do. And then there's the whole using a real guitar version of that game that was terrible. We talked about it in another video recently. But yeah, maybe it'll come back someday when they figure out how to adapt it into a modern expectation and aesthetic. And that's 10 trends that are pretty much gone. What do you think? Leave us a comment. Let us know. If you could think of another example we didn't talk about here, maybe we'll do another one of these. Leave us a comment, like I said. We upload brand new videos every single day, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription, so click subscribe. Don't forget to enable notifications, and as always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on gameranx.